A single beacon pulses in the darkness. Its signal is weak now, old enough that no one expects an answer. The transmitter hangs above a forgotten world, turning slowly through the cold vacuum, its power cells nearly exhausted after decades of faithful service. Every few moments it sends the same burst of information into space: coordinates, identification codes, a planetary designation, a name. Yet on modern star charts, that name no longer exists. The Empire removed it. The archives buried it. The officials who authorized the deletion are long dead. Still, the beacon continues its lonely task, repeating the memory of a world that an empire once tried to erase. This is the story of the forgotten worlds the Empire erased. And tonight you can simply let the stars drift past while the history unfolds around you. If you've returned for another journey, quietly note which night this is for you. If you're new here, call it Night 1. Together we will follow vanished names through abandoned archives, ruined cities, and silent sectors of the galaxy, tracing the places that disappeared, not because they were destroyed, but because someone decided they should be forgotten. The strange thing is that the Galactic Empire rarely relied on a single method. When people think of Imperial power, they often picture the Death Star hanging over Alderaan in 0 BBY, or endless formations of stormtroopers marching beneath towering banners. Yet fear alone was never enough. Emperor Palpatine understood something older and more subtle. A government can rule bodies through force, but it controls the future through memory. If citizens forget what came before, forget what alternatives existed, forget which worlds resisted and which cultures flourished, then power begins to feel permanent. The Empire did not merely conquer planets, it reorganized history itself. Why would an empire spend enormous resources erasing places that posed little military threat? The question becomes even more intriguing when you examine the years immediately following the fall of the Republic. In 19 BBY, after the events of the Clone Wars and the execution of Order 66, Chancellor Palpatine transformed the Galactic Republic into the Galactic Empire. Senators applauded inside the Senate Rotunda on Coruscant. Clone troopers became Imperial soldiers. Republic institutions adopted new names. Yet beneath these visible changes, a quieter transformation was already underway. Records were consolidated, archives centralized, and information placed under increasingly strict control. The Imperial Security Bureau became one of the most feared organizations in the galaxy. By the time of the events depicted in Andor, the ISB had grown into an immense network of surveillance officers, analysts, investigators, and political enforcers. Inside sterile conference chambers on Coruscant, officers debated production quotas, security incidents, insurgent activity, and population control. Major Partagaz demanded efficiency. Dedra Miro hunted patterns hidden inside scattered reports. The Empire collected information obsessively. Yet the same government that gathered data with almost religious dedication also decided which information deserved to survive. A record preserved in an Imperial archive existed. A record deleted by Imperial decree might vanish forever. You can see hints of this mentality throughout the Imperial era. In Star Wars Rebels, entire populations live under official narratives crafted by Imperial authorities. News broadcasts present occupations as liberation. Military crackdowns become peacekeeping operations. Resistance fighters become criminals. The Empire rarely announces that it is lying. Instead, it floods the galaxy with carefully managed truth. A citizen living on a distant outer rim world might never learn what really happened in another sector. Distance had always been a challenge in a galaxy containing millions of inhabited systems. The Empire transformed that challenge into a weapon. The Old Republic had never been perfect. Corruption existed. Bureaucracy moved slowly. Entire sectors often felt neglected. Yet the Republic's enormous Senate at least preserved competing voices. Representatives from core worlds and outer rim colonies argued constantly. History survived because different groups remembered events differently. The Empire preferred a cleaner arrangement. One emperor, one official narrative, one approved version of the past. Worlds that complicated that narrative often found themselves pushed toward obscurity. Consider the geography of the galaxy itself. Star Wars maps often feel permanent when viewed from a distance. Coruscant remains the capital. Corellia continues building ships. Kuat still produces star destroyers. Yet political maps change surprisingly quickly. Sector boundaries shift. Hyperlanes are reclassified. Colonies are reassigned. During imperial rule, administrative restructuring became a powerful instrument. Entire regions could disappear behind technical language. A world did not always need to be destroyed. Sometimes it only needed to be removed from attention. This tendency appears especially striking when examining worlds connected to uncomfortable truths. Certain planets reminded the galaxy of the Clone Wars. Others preserved traditions older than the Empire itself. Some contained evidence of imperial crimes. Others simply stood in the way of economic or military priorities. Again and again, a pattern emerges. The Empire encountered a problem, and rather than merely solving it, it attempted to erase the memory that the problem had ever existed. There is a revealing irony here. Palpatine's rise depended on memory. He spent years manipulating public fears born from real events: the Naboo crisis, separatist unrest, the Clone Wars. He convinced citizens that only stronger authority could protect them from chaos. Yet once that authority was established, memories became dangerous. People who remembered freedom could imagine freedom returning. People who remembered local traditions could resist cultural assimilation. People who remembered atrocities might demand justice. Memory itself became a threat. Many imperial officers likely believed they were preserving order. Not every administrator woke each morning intending to commit evil. The Empire's machinery functioned because thousands of officials convinced themselves they were serving stability. You can almost picture them working late inside government offices on Coruscant, reviewing reports beneath white lights, stamping approvals onto documents that would alter the fate of entire populations. A file disappears from an archive, a survey mission is canceled, funding is withdrawn. A world slips further into obscurity. No explosion marks the moment, no fleet arrives overhead, yet history changes all the same. The tragedy is that forgotten worlds leave fewer witnesses behind. The destruction of Alderaan shocked the galaxy because it happened suddenly and publicly. Billions died in an instant. Everyone heard about it. But what about the worlds that vanished gradually? What about planets whose names faded from navigation charts over years rather than seconds? What about cultures squeezed into irrelevance until future generations scarcely knew they had existed? Those losses are harder to measure. Their silence settles over the galaxy like dust. And so our journey begins not with a super weapon firing across the stars, but with an unanswered question drifting through the darkness. Why did the Empire fear memory so much? To find the answer, we must travel to a world of endless oceans and towering, storm-racked platforms. A place where an army was born, a place that helped create the Empire itself, and a place whose disappearance reveals just how far Palpatine was willing to go once victory had finally been secured. The rain is already falling on Kamino. Why destroy the very world that created the army which won Palpatine his empire? The question hangs over Kamino like one of the endless storms that circle the planet's oceans. Long before the Empire existed, Kamino occupied a strange place in galactic affairs. Located beyond the Rishi Maze in the extragalactic reaches of known space, it was isolated, difficult to reach, and largely absent from everyday political life. Yet by 22 BBY, when Obi-Wan Kenobi arrived during the events of Attack of the Clones, the world had become one of the most important locations in the galaxy. Beneath gray skies and constant rain, the Kaminoans had spent years growing the clone army commissioned in secret by Jedi Master Sifo Dyas. Millions of soldiers had been born there. The Clone Wars themselves would be fought by men whose lives began inside Kaminoan laboratories. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the sound that defined Kamino. Not blaster fire, not military marches. Rain, endless rain-striking transparasteel domes and landing platforms elevated above an ocean with no visible horizon. The cities of Kamino stood on massive stilts because the world's seas had swallowed most of its land long ago. Tipoca City, the most famous of these settlements, housed cloning facilities, training centers, genetic laboratories, and administrative chambers. During the Republic era, it represented one of the greatest achievements of biological engineering in the known galaxy. During the Imperial era, it became a reminder of an inconvenient truth. The Empire preferred to present itself as inevitable. According to Imperial propaganda, strong leadership had rescued civilization from chaos. Citizens were encouraged to see the Emperor as the architect of stability. Yet the reality was more complicated. The Empire's power rested heavily upon the clone army inherited from the Republic. Every victory during the final days of the Clone Wars, every successful execution of Order 66, every occupation of former separatist worlds depended upon soldiers created on Kamino. The planet was living evidence that the Empire had not emerged naturally. It had been engineered. By the time of the Bad Batch, the transition was already underway. The Clone Wars ended in 19 BBY. The Republic became the Empire. Stormtrooper recruitment programs began expanding across Imperial territory. Clones still served, but their future looked uncertain. Governor Wilhuff Tarkin, years before becoming Grand Moff Tarkin, questioned the efficiency of continued cloning. Recruited soldiers cost less. They could be drawn from conquered populations. More importantly, their loyalty belonged directly to imperial institutions rather than to the legacy of the Republic. The conflict between these visions became visible on Kamino itself. Prime Minister Lama Su understood that his world's survival depended on the cloning program. Without imperial contracts, Kamino's importance would collapse. Nala Se, the chief scientist responsible for much of the cloning operation, pursued her own priorities. Meanwhile, Imperial officials increasingly viewed Kamino not as a partner but as a temporary asset. The relationship had shifted fundamentally. During the Clone Wars, Kamino had been indispensable. After the Clone Wars, it became expendable. Why not simply abandon the planet and move on? That is where the story becomes darker. In the Bad Batch, Vice Admiral Rampart receives direct authority over Imperial military operations connected to Kamino. As the Empire accelerates Project War Mantle and transitions toward stormtrooper recruitment, the cloning facilities lose strategic value. Yet the destruction that follows goes beyond simple budget cuts. Imperial forces begin dismantling the very infrastructure that once sustained the war effort. Laboratories are emptied, personnel are relocated, valuable research is seized. Then comes the final act. Tipoca City is destroyed by Imperial bombardment. The scene remains one of the most chilling moments in the early Imperial timeline because there is no battle taking place. No invading separatist fleet threatens the world. No enemy army occupies the city. Instead, Imperial Venator-class star destroyers open fire on the facility they once protected. Turbo laser blasts tear through the towers rising above the ocean. Sections collapse into the waves. The same military machine that Kamino helped create turns its weapons against its birthplace. It is not conquest, it is erasure. As the city sinks beneath the surface, the symbolism is difficult to ignore. Kamino's history vanishes beneath the ocean that had always surrounded it. Laboratories disappear. Records are lost. Entire generations of scientific achievement collapse into the depths. The Empire does preserve selected research. Nala Se herself is transferred to a secret Imperial installation associated with advanced cloning projects. Yet the public face of Kamino is eliminated. The world no longer occupies the central role it once held. Some fans have connected these events to later Imperial cloning experiments that eventually lead toward the secret research seen on Mount Tantus in the Bad Batch, and decades later, the Sith Eternal's efforts on Exegol. Canon establishes links between Imperial interest in cloning and Palpatine's long-term plans, though many details remain deliberately hidden. What matters here is that the Empire never abandoned cloning entirely. It abandoned Kamino. The knowledge was useful. The place where that knowledge originated was not. This distinction appears repeatedly throughout Imperial history. The Empire often seized resources while discarding identities. A culture could be destroyed while its technology survived. A population could disappear while its labor continued benefiting Imperial projects elsewhere. Kamino became one of the earliest examples. The Empire wanted the results of Kaminoan science, but not the independent civilization that created it. The achievement could remain. The authors had to go. There is another mystery hidden beneath the waves. What exactly frightened Imperial leadership about the clones themselves? Officially, recruitment simply offered greater flexibility. Yet, clone veterans carried memories stretching back to the Republic. They remembered serving Jedi generals. They remembered fighting for institutions that no longer existed. They represented continuity between two eras that Palpatine preferred to separate. A stormtrooper recruited at 18 knew only the Empire. A clone trooper remembered what came before. You can see traces of this anxiety throughout the Bad Batch. Clone units are reassigned, marginalized, and gradually replaced. Veterans who spent years securing Imperial victory discover that loyalty offers little protection. Some continue serving faithfully, others begin questioning the system. Captain Rex walks a different path. Commander Cody grows increasingly disillusioned. Clone Force 99 becomes direct evidence that independent thought survives despite Imperial expectations. The Empire had inherited an army of individuals trained to follow orders, yet those individuals possessed memories, friendships, and experiences that could not be entirely controlled. In the years that followed, Kamino faded from prominence. Travelers rarely discussed it. New recruits arrived from countless worlds across the galaxy. Imperial academies replaced cloning centers as symbols of military power. To many citizens, the clone army slowly became history. That outcome suited Palpatine perfectly. The less people thought about Kamino, the less they thought about the fragile sequence of events that had elevated him to the throne. Yet forgotten does not mean gone. Beneath the storms, beneath the dark waters surrounding the ruins of Tipoca City, the past remains where the Empire left it. Broken towers rest on the ocean floor. Empty laboratories sleep in darkness. The rain still falls exactly as it did during the Republic era. And somewhere beyond Kamino, another world is preparing to vanish from memory, not through sinking cities or hidden archives, but through a genocide so complete that much of the galaxy will barely remember it happened. That world is Lasan. Why does the destruction of Lasan receive so little attention in galactic history when it was one of the Empire's earliest genocides? The question becomes more unsettling the longer you sit with it. Nearly every Star Wars fan knows the fate of Alderaan. Even people with only passing knowledge of the galaxy recognize the image of the Death Star firing its super laser in 0 BBY. Yet years before Alderaan was destroyed, another people suffered a catastrophe that reshaped an entire civilization. The difference is that Alderaan died in front of the galaxy. Lasan died largely in silence. The Empire ensured that very few would remember. Lasan was the homeworld of the Lasat, a tall, powerful species distinguished by their striped markings, immense physical strength, and rich cultural traditions. Before Imperial occupation, Lasan possessed thriving cities, artistic heritage, spiritual customs, and warrior orders that stretched back generations. The Lasat were not a dominant galactic power. They controlled no massive fleets. They did not sit at the center of galactic politics. In many ways, that made them vulnerable. History often preserves the stories of powerful worlds. Smaller civilizations can disappear with frightening speed. The Imperial assault on Lasan occurred sometime before the events of Rebels, several years before the Battle of Yavin. By then, the Empire had already spent years consolidating authority across the galaxy. Resistance movements appeared on countless worlds, some organized, others spontaneous. According to Imperial accounts, unrest on Lashan required decisive action. The official language sounded familiar: security concerns, public order, necessary intervention. Yet the reality experienced by the Lasat was catastrophic. At the center of this story stands one of the most fascinating characters in Rebels, Agent Alexander Kallus. When audiences first meet him, Kallus appears to embody the confident face of Imperial authority. He serves the Empire faithfully. He hunts rebels relentlessly. He speaks with absolute certainty about Imperial actions. Yet buried beneath that certainty is a memory that refuses to remain silent, the memory of Lassan. Kallus participated directly in the campaign against the Lasat. He carried a bow rifle, a weapon adapted from traditional Lasat technology and repurposed for Imperial service. During his early appearances, he proudly claims responsibility for crushing the Lasat resistance. He presents the operation as a military necessity. To Kallus, at least initially, Lassan represents proof that order triumphed over disorder. The Empire taught its servants to interpret events that way. Victory became morality. Compliance became peace. But history has a habit of surviving inside people, even when governments suppress it. One of the survivors of the genocide is Garazeb Aurelios, known throughout Rebels as Zeb. Unlike Kallus, Zeb remembers Lassan from the perspective of those who lost everything. Through him, viewers gradually learn that Imperial forces employed devastating weapons against civilian populations. Entire communities vanished. Ancient traditions fractured. Families disappeared. The Lasat were not simply defeated, they were nearly erased. The emotional weight of this revelation becomes especially powerful because Rebels refuses to reduce the tragedy to statistics. Instead, the series focuses on memory. Zeb carries Lassan with him wherever he travels. His anger, humor, loyalty, and grief all connect back to a world that no longer exists in the form he once knew. Every joke shared aboard the Ghost, every battle fought against the Empire, exists in the shadow of that loss. The destruction of a civilization is not measured only by bodies. It is measured by the futures that never arrive. Why would the Empire devote such effort to destroying an entire people rather than merely occupying their world? Part of the answer lies in fear. The Lasat possessed a strong cultural identity. They remembered who they were. They maintained traditions that predated imperial rule. Totalitarian governments often tolerate diversity only when it remains politically harmless. Once identity becomes a source of resistance, it becomes a target. The Empire repeatedly demonstrated this pattern across the galaxy. Cultures that could not be fully assimilated often faced repression. Lassan became one of the clearest examples. Yet Rebels introduces an important complication. The Empire failed. Years after the genocide, Zeb encounters other surviving Lasat. Guided by ancient teachings and aided by the mysterious force-sensitive pathways known as the Ashla, they journey toward the hidden world of Lyra San. The sequence stands among the most spiritual moments in the series. Ancient Lasat legends, once dismissed as myths, reveal themselves to contain genuine truth. A people believed destroyed discover a future. Survival emerges from memory rather than military power. This development carries profound significance. Palpatine's empire excelled at destroying infrastructure. It could level cities, occupy sectors, and deploy overwhelming force. What it struggled to eliminate was belief. The Lasat carried stories across the stars. Parents passed traditions to children. Survivors remembered names, songs, rituals, and histories. The Empire could kill individuals. It found memory much harder to kill. The relationship between Zeb and Kallus illustrates this idea beautifully. One of Rebels' strongest character arcs unfolds when Kallus begins confronting what he helped create. After becoming stranded with Zeb on the frozen moon of Geonosis, He experiences isolation, vulnerability, and dependence on someone he once viewed as an enemy. For the first time, Imperial narratives start cracking. Callus can no longer hide behind reports and official language. He must face a survivor. Their conversations never magically erase the past, nor should they. Callus remains responsible for his actions. Rebels understands that redemption does not require forgetting history. In fact, redemption begins by remembering it honestly. The Empire taught Callus a story about Lasan. Reality tells a different story. The gap between those versions becomes impossible for him to ignore. And then there is the strange fact that so few people in the wider galaxy seem aware of what happened. By the time of the Galactic Civil War, Lasan receives little discussion outside the circles directly affected by its destruction. The Empire succeeded in limiting attention. No Death Star appeared in orbit. No single event broadcast the catastrophe across every sector. The genocide unfolded through military operations, occupation, and suppression. It became another tragedy hidden inside Imperial paperwork. That obscurity makes Lasan uniquely important. Alderaan shows what happens when the Empire embraces terror openly. Lysan shows what happens when terror remains largely unseen. One atrocity becomes famous because billions witness it. The other fades because the Empire controls the narrative. Yet for the victims, the suffering is no less real. Forgotten tragedies do not hurt less than remembered ones. As the years pass, Lasan becomes exactly the kind of world Palpatine preferred, absent from conversation, diminished in influence, removed from the center of galactic consciousness. But memory survives in unexpected places. A survivor aboard a rebel ship, a former Imperial officer haunted by his choices, a hidden colony carrying ancient traditions into the future. The Empire came close to erasing the Lasat, but close is not the same as complete. And far away, on another world tied to one of the Empire's greatest secrets, an even more systematic disappearance is unfolding. Entire populations are vanishing. Cities are falling silent. The factories that once built armies for the Separatists stand abandoned. Most of the galaxy barely notices. Yet on Geonosis, beneath empty skies and forgotten hives, the Empire is preparing to erase not just a people, but nearly an entire species. Did the Empire erase Geonosis primarily as punishment, or was it trying to hide evidence of something much larger? Few planets in Star Wars occupy a stranger position in galactic history than Geonosis. For many citizens of the Republic, the world first entered public consciousness in 22 BBY during the opening battles of the Clone Wars. It was here that Obi-Wan Kenobi discovered the Separatist alliance taking shape beneath Count Dooku. It was here that thousands of battle droids marched from immense factories buried beneath the planet's surface. It was here that the Jedi launched their desperate rescue mission into the Petranaki arena. Geonosis was not a forgotten world then. It stood at the center of galactic events. The planet itself seemed designed for industry and conflict. Endless deserts stretched beneath orange skies. Massive rock spires rose from the landscape like ancient monuments. Beneath the surface sprawled colossal hive complexes inhabited by the insectoid Geonosians. Unlike many species of the Republic, Geonosian society revolved around collective labor. Engineers, workers, and builders transformed the harsh world into a manufacturing powerhouse. During the Clone Wars, those talents became essential to the Confederacy of Independent Systems. When viewers revisit Attack of the Clones today, there is a detail that carries far greater significance than it first appears. Inside a Geonosian factory, Count Dooku oversees plans for a mysterious battle station. The design appears only briefly. Most characters barely understand what they are seeing, yet the audience now knows the truth. The object under development is the Death Star. Long before Alderaan, before Rogue One, before Luke Skywalker's attack on Yavin, Geonosis already possessed knowledge connected to the Empire's most devastating weapon. That fact changes everything. After the Clone Wars ended in 19 BBY, Geonosis should have remained valuable. The Empire inherited countless former Separatist assets. It routinely absorbed industrial worlds into its growing military machine. Geonosis possessed factories, infrastructure, technical expertise, and a population skilled in large-scale engineering. Yet instead of flourishing under Imperial rule, the planet began disappearing. Not physically at first, administratively, socially, demographically. The signs were subtle enough that most of the galaxy paid little attention. Years later, during the events of Rebels, the crew of the Ghost arrives at Geonosis expecting to find an active population. Instead, they discover silence. The imagery is haunting. Vast settlements stand abandoned beneath the desert sun. Industrial facilities lie dormant. Entire hive networks appear empty. No bustling workers move through the canyons. No great swarms fill the skies. The planet feels less like a living world than an archaeological site. Even before the truth emerges, something feels deeply wrong. Civilizations do not simply vanish without explanation. The Empire's official position is straightforward. According to Imperial records, a dangerous containment operation required intervention on Geonosis. The details remain vague. The explanation raises more questions than answers. Why would an entire species disappear? Why would settlements covering enormous areas become deserted? Why do Imperial patrols remain interested in a supposedly resolved situation years later? The deeper the Ghost crew investigates, the less convincing the official story becomes. Then they find Click-Clack. Among the most poignant figures in Rebels, Click-Clack appears at first glance to be an ordinary Geonosian survivor. Yet his existence carries enormous implications. He seems to be one of the last living members of his species. Alone among the ruins, he protects a single queen egg. That small object becomes one of the most heartbreaking symbols in modern Star Wars canon. Entire civilizations often measure survival through armies, governments, or cities. Click-Clack measures survival through one unborn life. The evidence revealed throughout Rebels points toward an Imperial sterilization campaign that devastated the Geonosian population. Most of the species disappears. Settlements are emptied. Generations are wiped away. The exact numbers remain unknown, but the scale is staggering. Unlike a conventional military defeat, this is not a battle with opposing armies. It is the near erasure of a people. Once again, the Empire demonstrates that destruction does not always require a superweapon. Oh, why would Palpatine consider such an extreme measure necessary? The most compelling answer lies in the Death Star itself. Geonosis had participated in the earliest stages of the project. Its workers understood aspects of the station's construction. Its leadership possessed knowledge that connected separatist activities, Republic secrets, and future Imperial ambitions. As the Death Star became the Empire's most closely guarded project, witnesses transformed into liabilities. Entire populations knew too much. This interpretation gains strength when viewed alongside other canonical events. The Empire repeatedly eliminates loose ends connected to sensitive operations. Scientists disappear. Witnesses are silenced. Records are sealed. By the time director Orson Krennic oversees major phases of Death Star construction, secrecy has become almost as important as engineering. The station's existence remains hidden from much of the galaxy until shortly before Rogue One. Geonosis represented a dangerous archive of living memories. There is something especially tragic about this because Geonosians were builders. Throughout the Clone Wars, their greatest strength lay in creation. They designed factories, war machines, and industrial systems on astonishing scales. The Empire exploited those abilities and then discarded the civilization behind them. Once again, the pattern repeats. The Empire preserves utility while eliminating identity. What matters is production. The producers themselves become expendable. Some fans have wondered whether the Empire feared more than simple leaks. A popular theory suggests that Geonosis contained evidence revealing just how long the Death Star project had existed, connecting threads stretching back into the final years of the Republic. Canon never explicitly confirms this theory, but it fits the broader pattern. Palpatine benefited enormously from controlling historical narratives. The fewer people understood the continuity between Republic secrets and Imperial ambitions, the better. The silence of Geonosis also serves another purpose within the larger story of Star Wars. It acts as a warning. By the time Rebels uncovers the truth, the Death Star already exists. The weapon is approaching completion, yet almost nobody understands the scale of what is coming. Geonosis becomes the ghost of a future catastrophe, a world emptied because it stood too close to a secret that would soon threaten the entire galaxy. As the sun set over abandoned hives and wind drifts through empty canyons, Geonosis feels less like a planet and more like a crime scene. The evidence remains visible. The victims are absent. The perpetrators continue ruling from Coruscant. Somewhere among the ruins, Click-Clack guards the fragile possibility that his people might someday return. It is a small act of resistance against oblivion itself. But even Geonosis was not sacred in the way the next world was. The Empire could justify destroying a former separatist stronghold to its supporters. Explaining what happened on Jedha would be far more difficult, because Jedha was not merely a planet, it was a place of pilgrimage, faith, ancient memory, and deep connection to the Force. And when the Empire chose its first great demonstration of terror, it selected one of the holiest worlds in the galaxy. Why would the Empire choose one of the galaxy's most sacred Force worlds as the first major demonstration of the Death Star's power? The question becomes even stranger when you understand what Jedha was before Imperial occupation, long before the Republic, before the Clone Wars, before the rise of Palpatine. Pilgrims traveled to this desert moon seeking spiritual meaning. Jedha occupied a unique place in galactic culture because it stood at the crossroads of many Force traditions. The Jedi revered it. Other Force-based religions respected it. Ancient temples dotted its landscape. Generations crossed vast distances simply to walk its streets and pray beneath its stone towers. It was not merely inhabited territory, It was sacred ground. When you first see Jeddah in Rogue One, the atmosphere feels different from most Star Wars worlds. The narrow streets of Jeddah City are crowded with travelers, merchants, monks, refugees, and soldiers. Ancient architecture rises beside signs of modern occupation. Prayer wheels turn in the wind. Market stalls line weathered pathways. The city feels old in a way that even Coruscant often does not. Coruscant represents civilization. Jeddah represents memory. Every stone seems connected to centuries of belief. One reason for Jeddah's importance was its relationship with Kyber crystals. For thousands of years, the Jedi Order used Kyber crystals as the hearts of lightsabers. These crystals possessed a unique connection to the Force. They were not manufactured, they were discovered. Jedi younglings undertook sacred journeys to locate them. The process carried spiritual significance as well as practical importance. In the era of the Republic, worlds associated with Kyber became places of reverence. The Empire saw something different. To Imperial scientists and military planners, Kyber crystals represented energy, massive energy. Under the direction of figures such as Orson Krennic, Imperial operations expanded aggressively across Jeddah. Mines dug deeper into ancient landscapes. Sacred sites fell under military control. Occupation forces increased their presence. The moon's spiritual significance mattered little compared to its strategic value. The Empire had found a resource capable of helping power the Death Star's super laser. The contradiction is striking. The same crystals that once illuminated Jedi lightsabers would eventually fuel the weapon designed to impose Imperial dominance across the galaxy. A substance associated with guardianship became a component of terror. The transformation perfectly reflects Palpatine's broader philosophy. He rarely created entirely new systems. Instead, he corrupted existing ones. Republic institutions became Imperial institutions. Clone armies became Imperial armies. Sacred Kyber became a tool of fear. Why not test the Death Star somewhere remote and uninhabited? From a purely military perspective, that option existed. The Empire controlled countless systems. It possessed isolated regions of space where weapons testing could occur without witnesses. Yet Jedha was selected for a reason. The choice carried symbolic power. Destroying part of a sacred world sent a message extending beyond military capability. It demonstrated that no tradition, no history, and no belief system stood beyond Imperial reach. The events of Rogue One unfold against this backdrop. Resistance movements operate within Jeddah City. Among them is Saw Gerrera's partisan network, a faction willing to employ extreme methods against Imperial occupation. Saw himself represents one of the lingering scars of the Clone Wars. Having fought alongside the Republic during the conflict on Onderon, he evolves into one of the Empire's earliest and most relentless enemies. By the time Jyn Erso arrives on Jedha, Saw has become both a freedom fighter and a warning about the costs of endless war. Then the Death Star arrives. From orbit, Grand Moff Tarkin authorizes a limited test of the station's super laser. This distinction matters. Alderaan's destruction later involves the full annihilation of a planet. Jedha experiences something different yet still horrifying. A single reactor ignition sends unimaginable energy toward the surface. The blast consumes Jeddah City and surrounding regions. Shock waves race across the landscape. Towers collapse. Ancient monuments vanish. Entire neighborhoods disappear beneath expanding devastation. The sequence remains haunting because the audience witnesses ordinary life moments before catastrophe strikes. Pilgrims walk through the streets, traders conduct business, rebels move through hidden routes, stormtroopers patrol checkpoints. Then history ends for everyone within the blast zone. The destruction feels intimate in a way that planetary annihilation sometimes does not. You can imagine the streets. You can picture the people. The loss acquires human scale. What exactly was erased when Jeddah City died? The simplest answer is lives. Thousands perish immediately. Yet the deeper answer involves memory. Temples disappear, archives vanish, oral traditions are interrupted, places visited by generations of pilgrims cease to exist. The Empire destroys not only physical structures, but also connections between past and present. Throughout this series, we have seen the Empire attack worlds. On Jeddah, it attacks history itself. There is another layer worth considering. Palpatine had spent decades waging war against the legacy of the Jedi. Order 66 eliminated most members of the Order in 19 BBY. The Inquisitorius hunted survivors across the galaxy. Jedi temples were abandoned, desecrated, or hidden. Yet the Force remained larger than the Jedi alone. Worlds like Jeddah preserved ancient traditions that could not be erased through military action alone. By occupying and ultimately devastating Jeddah, the Empire struck at a broader spiritual heritage. Ironically, the destruction helped create the very resistance it intended to suppress. The events of Rogue One set in motion the chain of decisions that eventually leads to the Battle of Yavin. The Death Star's deployment exposes its existence. Rebels obtain evidence. Imperial secrecy begins unraveling. Every effort to demonstrate invincibility instead reveals vulnerability. The Empire wants fear. What it receives is determination. The survivors who witness Jeddah's fate do not surrender. They fight harder. There is a quiet sadness in imagining what remains afterward. Jeddah survives physically. The moon itself is not destroyed. Desert winds continue crossing ancient valleys. Distant settlements endure beyond the blast zone, yet a wound remains visible from orbit. A scar marks the landscape where a city once stood. Pilgrims who return in later years do not find the Jeddah their ancestors knew. They find absence, they find silence. And perhaps that is what connects Jeddah to Camino, Lasan, and Geonosis. Each world loses something beyond population or infrastructure. Each suffers an attack on memory. The Empire repeatedly targets places that preserve alternative stories about the galaxy. Different cultures, different identities, different ways of understanding the past. Every erased world narrows the range of voices that can challenge Imperial authority. Yet not all Imperial erasures involved superweapons or mass death. Sometimes the process appeared quieter, a culture slowly squeezed into irrelevance, a people displaced by bureaucratic decisions and military expansion, a world transformed until outsiders scarcely remembered what had existed before. To understand that version of imperial conquest, we must travel to the highlands of Aldhani, where ancient traditions endured beneath the stars until the Empire decided there was no longer room for them. Was the Empire more threatened by armed rebellion, or by cultures that simply refused to disappear? The question sits at the heart of Aldhani's story. Unlike Camino, Geonosis, or Jeddah, Aldhani was not famous throughout the galaxy. It possessed no clone facilities, no secret superweapon projects, and no ancient status comparable to the holiest Force worlds. At first glance, it appears almost insignificant. Yet Andor reveals that Aldhani represented something the Empire found deeply unsettling. It was a place where people still remembered who they were. The world itself is beautiful in a quiet way. Rolling highlands stretch beneath immense skies. Rivers wind through broad valleys. Winds move across open grasslands, largely untouched by industrial development. For generations, the indigenous Dani people maintained traditions connected to the land and to the remarkable celestial event known as the Eye of Aldhani. During this rare astronomical phenomenon, brilliant streams of meteor-like lights fill the night sky, creating one of the most breathtaking spectacles in the galaxy. Long before Imperial administrators arrived, the Eye carried spiritual and cultural importance. Dani families gathered to celebrate. Pilgrimages crossed the highlands. Stories passed from one generation to the next. Like many cultures in Star Wars, the Dani preserved identity through ritual. Their ceremonies were not merely celebrations, they were acts of collective memory. Every gathering reminded participants who they were and where they belonged. The Empire understood this better than many people realize. One of the most revealing aspects of Andor is its portrayal of Imperial governance. The Empire does not always arrive with star destroyers and mass executions. Often it begins with paperwork, surveys, infrastructure projects, administrative changes, new regulations, military installations. Piece by piece, local cultures find themselves pushed aside by systems designed elsewhere. Aldhani becomes a textbook example of this process. By 5 BBY, Imperial presence dominates large portions of the world. A major garrison has been established. Military engineers reshape the landscape. Security zones expand. Access restrictions increase. Official policies encourage population displacement. The Dani are gradually concentrated into smaller areas while Imperial facilities occupy increasingly valuable territory. The strategy is effective because it appears orderly. No single event announces the destruction of a culture. Instead, the culture slowly loses room to breathe. Why not simply allow the Dani to continue their traditions? From an Imperial perspective, independent identities created uncertainty. The Empire preferred citizens who defined themselves through imperial structures. Local loyalties complicated administration. Regional traditions encouraged separate ways of thinking. Cultural memory preserved alternatives to imperial authority. None of these things automatically produced rebellion, but they reduced predictability. For a government obsessed with control, unpredictability itself became a threat. The tragedy is visible during preparations for the Eye of Aldhani. Once, enormous numbers of pilgrims traveled across the world to witness the event. By the time Andor takes place, participation has collapsed dramatically. Imperial policies have fragmented the population. Economic pressures discourage travel. Administrative restrictions interfere with traditional gatherings. The celebration survives, but only barely. The Empire has not outlawed memory. It has made memory inconvenient. This context transforms the famous Aldhani heist into something larger than a robbery. When Cassian Andor joins Vel Sartha's rebel team, the mission focuses on stealing Imperial payroll funds from the Aldhani garrison. The operation unfolds during the eye because the spectacular celestial display creates confusion and distraction. On the surface, the objective appears financial. The rebels need resources. The Empire possesses them. Yet the setting matters. The theft occurs against the backdrop of a culture struggling to survive. Imperial authority and local identity occupy the same landscape, moving in opposite directions. The members of the Aldani team come from different backgrounds, but many recognize the symbolic importance of their target. The garrison does not merely represent military power, it represents occupation. Every tower and checkpoint reflects the gradual replacement of one way of life by another. When the rebels strike, they are attacking more than a treasury. They are challenging the assumption that imperial expansion is inevitable. The heist succeeds, though at tremendous cost. Several members of the team die. Namik's idealism is cut short. Skeen reveals his selfish ambitions. Gorn betrays the Empire after witnessing its treatment of local populations. Cassian escapes with the payroll. Across the galaxy, Imperial leaders react with alarm. The stolen credits matter, but the psychological impact matters more. Suddenly, the Empire appears vulnerable. Suddenly, resistance looks possible. What follows reveals the true nature of Imperial fear. In response to the Aldani raid, the Empire does not merely strengthen security around military installations. It expands repression across countless sectors. New surveillance measures appear, sentences become harsher, arrest quotas increase. The regime behaves less like a confident government and more like an anxious one. A single successful operation exposes how fragile imperial authority can feel beneath its polished exterior. And yet the most important story on Aldani may not involve the heist at all. It involves the dwindling number of pilgrims gathering beneath the eye. One of the most haunting moments in Andor occurs when you realize how few remain. Traditions that once united large populations now survive among scattered groups. Children inherit ceremonies increasingly disconnected from daily life. Elders remember larger gatherings that younger generations never experienced. No super laser fires, no city explodes. Nevertheless, a culture is being erased. The process simply unfolds slowly enough that outsiders rarely notice. This is one reason Aldani belongs beside worlds like Lasan and Geonosis. The Empire employs different methods, but the objective remains familiar. Reduce memory, reduce identity, reduce alternatives. A people who forget their past become easier to govern. A people who remember remain unpredictable. There is an irony hidden here. The Eye of Aldani itself cannot be controlled. Imperial officers may regulate roads, construct bases, and issue decrees, but they cannot command the stars. Every cycle, the celestial phenomenon returns. Brilliant lights sweep across the heavens exactly as they did before the Empire arrived. Nature continues preserving rhythms older than politics. The sky remembers even when governments try to forget. And while Aldani struggled to preserve its traditions, another world served the opposite purpose. Instead of protecting memory, it stored secrets, vast quantities of them. Hidden beneath tropical skies and behind layers of security stood one of the most important archives in the imperial system. A place where entire histories, military projects, and classified records were gathered together. A place called Scarif, where the Empire attempted to hide the truth itself. How many entire worlds survived only as forgotten files inside Imperial archives? It is one of the strangest questions in Star Wars because there is no way to answer it fully. The Empire collected information on a scale almost beyond imagination. Survey data, military intelligence, economic records, hyperspace routes, archaeological findings, communications intercepts, population statistics, and classified research projects flowed constantly into Imperial databases. Somewhere within that ocean of information existed countless stories about planets, species, and cultures scattered across the galaxy. Most citizens would never see those records. Many Imperial officials could not access them either. Knowledge itself had become compartmentalized. No world embodied this reality more completely than Scarif. At first glance, Scarif appears almost idyllic. Tropical islands rest beneath bright skies. White beaches curve along clear waters. Palm-like vegetation sways in warm ocean winds. Unlike the industrial wastelands or occupied cities we have visited so far, Scarif looks peaceful. If a traveler arrived without context, they might mistake it for a luxury destination somewhere in the mid-rim. That illusion is precisely what makes the planet so fascinating. Beneath the beauty stood one of the Empire's most important military installations. Scarif served as a secure archive complex, protected by orbital defenses, planetary shields, elite troops, and strict access controls. Massive towers rose above the landscape, housing data vaults that contained some of the Empire's most closely guarded secrets. Within these repositories rested information about advanced weapons programs, military operations, intelligence activities, and classified projects spread across the galaxy. Scarif was not merely a storage facility, it was the memory palace of the Empire. Why place so much valuable information in a single location? The answer reflects a contradiction at the heart of Imperial governance. On one hand, Palpatine feared uncontrolled information. On the other, he required enormous amounts of information to maintain control. The Empire needed archives, it needed records, it needed data connecting distant sectors and military commands. Scarif represented an attempt to solve this problem through centralization. If knowledge could not be eliminated, it could at least be locked behind enough security to make it effectively inaccessible. Among the countless files stored there, none proved more important than those connected to the Death Star. By the time Rogue One begins, director Orson Krennic has spent years overseeing major portions of the project. Scientists, engineers, laborers, prisoners, and military personnel have contributed to construction efforts stretching across multiple worlds. The station itself is operational, yet its greatest weakness remains hidden within the archives. Galen Erso's carefully concealed flaw exists only as information, a tiny vulnerability buried inside an enormous weapon. The fate of the galaxy depends not on armies, but on a file. That fact reveals something profound about the Empire. Despite all its emphasis on military force, information remains its most valuable resource. Star destroyers can occupy systems, stormtroopers can suppress unrest, superweapons can destroy planets. Yet one piece of knowledge can undermine years of planning. Palpatine understands this, Krennic understands it, Tarkin understands it. The entire Imperial system depends upon controlling who knows what. The mission to Scarif therefore becomes more than a military operation. when Jyn Erso, Cassian Andor, K2SO, Chirrut Imwe, Baze Malbus, and the rest of Rogue One travel to Scarif in 0BBY, they are not attempting to destroy an army. They are attempting to recover truth. Specifically, they seek the Death Star plans hidden within the archive system. The objective sounds deceptively simple: obtain information, transmit information. Yet the Empire has built an entire fortress to prevent exactly that outcome. The battle that follows unfolds across multiple layers simultaneously. Rebel forces engage Imperial defenders on the ground. Starfighters clash in orbit. Communications teams struggle to establish transmission links. Inside the archive tower, Jyn and Cassian race against time. What makes the sequence so memorable is that every action revolves around knowledge. The rebels do not need to conquer Scarif. They only need to ensure that one secret escapes. For a brief moment, they succeed. The Death Star plans are transmitted to the rebel fleet. Information breaks free from Imperial control. Decades of secrecy collapse in an instant. Every sacrifice made during the battle contributes to that single achievement. Bodhi Rook's courage. K2SO's final stand. Chirrut's walk toward the Master Switch. Cassian and Jyn's determination. Their victory is not territorial, it is informational. Then comes the Empire's response. Grand Moff Tarkin arrives aboard the Death Star and faces a difficult choice. The battle is still underway. Imperial forces continue fighting. Valuable personnel remain on the surface. Scarif itself contains irreplaceable archives. Yet Tarkin recognizes a greater danger. If information can escape once, it can escape again. He orders the superlaser fired. The resulting destruction mirrors earlier Imperial actions while adding a new layer of irony. Geonosis was erased because it knew too much. Jedha was scarred because it resisted. Now Scarif, the very repository built to preserve Imperial secrets, becomes another casualty of Imperial paranoia. The Empire destroys part of its own memory to protect the rest. Once again, preservation and erasure become intertwined. Imagine the countless records lost in that moment. The films naturally focus on the Death Star plans, but Scarif contained far more than a single project. Entire databases vanished. Reports disappeared. Research archives were destroyed. Histories were erased. We do not know what information died beneath the superlaser blast. That uncertainty itself becomes part of Scarif's legacy. The archive designed to remember everything becomes another source of absence. There is a tragic beauty in this contradiction. Throughout our journey, we have seen the Empire attacking worlds, cultures, and populations. Scarif reveals that the Empire ultimately threatens its own memory as well. A government obsessed with secrecy inevitably begins destroying the records it worked so hard to collect. Fear consumes preservation. Control overwhelms knowledge. The archive becomes another graveyard. Yet even Scarif's destruction could not stop the truth from spreading. The Death Star plans reached the Rebel Alliance. Within days, the Battle of Yavin would destroy the station itself. Imperial secrecy suffered a wound from which it never fully recovered. The lesson is simple but powerful. Information hidden can be recovered. Information suppressed can re-emerge. Memory has a stubborn tendency to survive. And nowhere would that survival matter more than on Alderaan? Because if Scarif represented the Empire's attempt to control truth, Alderaan represented its decision to abandon subtlety altogether. On that world, there would be no hidden archives, no gradual cultural erosion, and no bureaucratic disappearance. There would only be a flash of green light, visible across the stars, and the destruction of an entire planet in a single terrible moment. Did the destruction of Alderaan strengthen Imperial rule, or did it destroy the illusion that the Empire could govern through fear alone? When Grand Moff Tarkin gave the order in 0 BBY, he believed he knew the answer. Standing aboard the Death Star, he viewed terror as a practical instrument of governance. The Imperial Senate had just been dissolved. Regional governors were assuming greater authority. The Death Star represented the ultimate guarantee of compliance. If entire planets could be destroyed, what government, movement, or population would dare resist? From Tarkin's perspective, Alderaan was not merely a target, it was an example. That choice remains astonishing when you consider what Alderaan represented. Unlike Geonosis, Alderaan had not fought for the Separatists. Unlike Jeddah, it was not an occupied frontier world. Unlike Lasan, it was not a marginalized civilization hidden from the galactic spotlight. Alderaan was one of the most respected core worlds in the galaxy. For generations, it had been associated with diplomacy, culture, education, and public service. Its mountains, forests, lakes, and cities made it one of the most beautiful planets in known space. Within the Republic, Alderaan carried moral influence far beyond its military power. The world also occupied a special place in the story of the rebellion. Senator Bail Organa spent years opposing authoritarian tendencies within the Republic and later resisting imperial expansion. During the Clone Wars, Bail worked closely with figures such as Padme Amidala and Mon Mothma. After the rise of the Empire, he became one of the key architects of organized resistance. Yet Alderaan itself maintained an appearance of loyalty. Publicly, it remained part of the imperial system. Beneath that surface, it helped nurture the movement that would eventually challenge Palpatine's rule. This dual identity makes Alderaan fascinating. The planet represented both legitimacy and dissent. It stood at the center of the Empire, while quietly supporting forces determined to undermine it. Perhaps that is one reason Tarkin selected it. Destroying Alderaan would send a message precisely because so many citizens considered it untouchable. The moment itself remains among the most devastating scenes in cinema history. Princess Leia Organa watches helplessly as the Death Star targets her homeworld. She's already endured interrogation and imprisonment. Tarkin demands the location of the rebel base. Leia names Dantooine in an attempt to save lives. Tarkin proceeds anyway. The decision reveals something essential about Imperial ideology. Compliance offers no guarantee of safety. The Empire destroys Alderaan not because it must, but because it can. Then the super laser fires. In a matter of seconds, billions of lives disappear. Mountains, oceans, forests, cities, archives, museums, universities, families, and generations of history vanish in a green flash visible across the stars. Entire bloodlines end instantly. Languages lose speakers. Cultural traditions lose practitioners. Unlike the gradual erasures we've examined elsewhere, Alderaan's destruction occurs all at once. Memory itself seems to shatter alongside the planet. Yet even here, the Empire fails to erase everything. One of the most overlooked aspects of Alderaan's story is that survivors exist. Some Alderaanians happen to be off-world when the attack occurs. Diplomats, traders, travelers, students, military personnel, and refugees suddenly find themselves transformed into the last living representatives of a lost civilization. Later canon stories repeatedly return to this theme. The destruction of a world creates not only grief, but also responsibility. Survivors become guardians of memory. Imagine receiving the news from another system. Perhaps you are a merchant arriving at a distant starport. Perhaps you are serving aboard a ship in the mid-rim. Perhaps you are studying on Coruscant. Then someone tells you that your world no longer exists. Not occupied, not conquered. Gone. Every childhood memory suddenly belongs to a place no one can ever revisit. Every familiar landscape survives only in recollection. The scale of that emotional catastrophe is difficult to comprehend. Why did the Empire miscalculate so badly? The answer lies in a fundamental misunderstanding of how fear operates. Fear can compel obedience for a time. It can discourage action. It can silence opposition. Yet fear also destroys legitimacy. Before Alderaan, many citizens tolerated the Empire because they believed it provided stability. After Alderaan, that belief became harder to sustain. The destruction was too visible, too extreme, too undeniable. The mask fell away. This effect appears throughout the period following the Battle of Yavin. Rather than crushing resistance, Alderaan's destruction becomes a rallying cry. The Rebel Alliance gains credibility. Neutral systems begin reconsidering their positions. Citizens who once viewed rebellion as reckless start asking different questions. If Alderaan can be destroyed, who is truly safe? The Empire wanted terror. It received outrage. There is a haunting irony here. Palpatine spent decades constructing a system designed to control memory. He manipulated history, censored information, and erased inconvenient worlds. Yet the destruction of Alderaan becomes one of the most unforgettable events in galactic history. The Empire creates exactly the kind of memory it cannot suppress. Billions of witnesses hear the story. Countless survivors repeat it. Every future generation remembers. And unlike Camino or Geonosis, Alderaan leaves visible remains. Asteroid fields and planetary debris continue orbiting the star where the world once existed. Pilots pass through the region. Memorial expeditions visit the site. Fragments of a destroyed civilization drift through space as physical evidence. The Empire cannot hide the crime because the crime is too large. Every piece of shattered stone becomes a reminder. Yet perhaps the most important legacy of Alderaan is Leia herself. As the adopted daughter of Bail and Breha Organa, Leia carries the memory of her world into the future. She loses her home, but not her purpose. Throughout the galactic civil war and beyond, she continues fighting against the forces responsible for its destruction. In this sense, Alderaan survives through action. The Empire destroys a planet and accidentally strengthens one of its most determined opponents. The lesson echoes across every world we have visited. Camino survives in memory. Lasan survives in memory. Geonosis survives in memory. Jedha survives in memory. Aldhani survives in memory. Alderaan joins them. Again and again, the Empire discovers that obliterating places is easier than eliminating what those places meant. Yet the story does not end with the fall of the Empire. After the Battle of Endor in 4 ABY and the Battle of Jakku in 5 ABY, a new mystery emerges. The Emperor is dead, the Imperial government collapses, but scattered across the unknown regions and hidden sectors of space, forgotten worlds continue concealing secrets. Some of those secrets belong to Palpatine himself, and some will shape the future of the galaxy long after the Empire appears to be gone. How many Imperial secrets survived simply because the Empire became so skilled at making worlds disappear? The question lingers after Endor. In 4 ABY, the second Death Star is destroyed above the forest moon of Endor. Darth Vader dies. Emperor Palpatine appears to perish. Across the galaxy, celebrations erupt. Statues fall, garrisons surrender. Entire sectors begin throwing off Imperial control. From a distance, it seems like the story has reached its natural conclusion. Tyranny falls, freedom returns, the Empire becomes history. Yet history is rarely that simple. One of the most important lessons of the post-Endor era is that institutions leave shadows behind. The Empire spent decades constructing hidden networks, secret projects, contingency plans, and classified installations. Those things do not vanish overnight. Even as the New Republic begins establishing authority, investigators repeatedly uncover evidence of operations that were never intended to be public. Entire fleets disappear into unknown regions. Records remain incomplete. Questions outnumber answers. The Battle of Jakku in 5 ABY illustrates this perfectly. Officially, Jakku marks the final great confrontation between the New Republic and the Empire. Massive fleets clash above the desert world. Star destroyers fall from orbit. Wreckage crashes into the sands. The Empire suffers catastrophic defeat. To many observers, Jakku appears to be the Empire's last stand. Yet later canon reveals a more complicated reality. What occurs at Jakku is not simply a failed defense, it is also part of Palpatine's contingency. Palpatine never trusted anyone completely, not governors, not admirals, not even the Empire itself. Canon novels, comics, and reference materials establish that the Emperor prepared for the possibility of his own death. If he could not rule the galaxy, he believed it deserved to burn. Through agents such as Gallius Rax, contingency plans began unfolding after Endor. Loyalists received secret instructions. Certain Imperial forces were directed towards specific objectives. Others were deliberately sacrificed. The apparent collapse of the Empire concealed a deeper strategy. Why would Palpatine destroy parts of his own creation? Because in his mind, weakness deserved extinction. The Emperor viewed failure as unforgivable. An empire incapable of protecting him had proven unworthy of survival. This brutal logic shaped the contingency. Rather than preserving every surviving institution, Palpatine sought to purge, refine, and rebuild. The result was a migration of selected personnel and resources toward regions beyond conventional galactic maps. This brings us to Exegol. Among all the hidden worlds in modern Star Wars canon, few are more mysterious. Located deep within the unknown regions, Exegol remained concealed for generations. Navigation required specialized route information. Violent anomalies and dangerous hyperspace conditions protected the system from casual discovery. To most of the galaxy, Exegol did not exist. Yet beneath perpetual storms and dark skies, an enormous secret endured. The world served as a Sith stronghold long before the rise of the Empire. Ancient Sith cultists inhabited the planet. Monumental structures rose from its bleak landscape. Rituals connected to Sith traditions continued in isolation. Most importantly, Exegol became the destination for projects extending far beyond ordinary Imperial ambitions. By the era of the rise of Skywalker, the world houses shipyards, laboratories, cloning facilities, and the vast fleet known as the Final Order. None of this emerges suddenly. The foundations were laid decades earlier. There is an eerie continuity between Exegol and the worlds we have already visited. Kamino contained cloning expertise. Geonosis concealed Death Star secrets. Scarif guarded classified archives. Exegol combines all these themes. It is a hidden world built around secrecy, preservation, and control. The difference is that Exegol survives the Empire's collapse. While other worlds are erased, Exegol remains hidden. It becomes the beneficiary of the very techniques the Empire perfected elsewhere. Some fans describe Exegol as the ultimate forgotten world. In many ways, that description fits. Entire generations live and die without knowing it exists. Governments remain unaware of its significance. Histories omitted, maps excluded. The world survives precisely because memory of it never becomes widespread. For decades, obscurity functions as a shield more effective than fleets. Yet Jakku reveals another side of the story. Walk through the wreckage fields years after the battle and you find evidence everywhere. Broken Star Destroyers lie half buried beneath dunes. Destroyed walkers rust in the desert. Engines, hull plates, and weapon systems slowly disappear beneath shifting sands. The Empire attempted to shape history through secrecy. Jakku refuses to cooperate. The debris remains visible. Anyone willing to look can see what happened. This tension between concealment and evidence appears repeatedly after the Imperial era. New Republic investigators uncover forgotten facilities. Former officers reveal hidden operations. Archives yield classified records. Refugees preserve oral histories. The Empire leaves behind far more traces than Palpatine intended. Some secrets survive, others emerge. The process unfolds slowly, but memory begins fighting its way back. Can a civilization truly erase a world if even one survivor still remembers its name? That question brings us to the final thread connecting every story in this journey. Kamino survives in former clones who remember rain striking the towers of Tipoca City. Laysan survives through Zeb and the Lasat, who reach Lyra San. Geonosis survives through Click-Clack's determination to protect a future generation. Jeddah survives through pilgrims and believers who preserve its traditions. Aldhani survives through ceremonies carried forward beneath the stars. Alderaan survives through survivors, descendants, and the example set by Leia Organa. Even worlds physically destroyed continue existing in unexpected ways. A child learns a story from a grandparent. A refugee preserves a cultural tradition. A recovered archive reveals a forgotten truth. A traveler visits an old battlefield. Memory moves from person to person, generation to generation. Governments can suppress it. Armies can threaten it. Empires can attempt to rewrite it. Yet memory rarely disappears entirely. And so we return to where we began. Far from the major hyperspace routes, beyond the attention of governments and fleets, An ancient survey beacon continues drifting through darkness. Its casing is scarred by time. Its power reserves are nearly gone. Stars turn slowly around it. Every few moments, the transmitter awakens and sends one more signal into the void. Coordinates, identification codes, a planetary designation, a forgotten name. The empire that tried to erase that name has long since fallen. Its banners are dust, its fleets are wreckage, its archives are scattered. Yet the beacon continues speaking, patiently, faithfully, as though it understands something Palpatine never did. Worlds are not remembered because governments permit it. They are remembered because somewhere someone refuses to forget. What lingers after all these stories is not the power of the Empire, but its failure. At first glance, that sounds strange. The Empire conquered thousands of worlds. It commanded fleets large enough to darken the skies of entire systems. It built battle stations capable of destroying planets and intelligence networks capable of monitoring vast regions of the galaxy. Yet when you look closely at the worlds we visited, a pattern emerges. The Empire could dominate space, but it struggled to dominate memory. Again and again, it discovered that the most enduring things in the galaxy are often the least visible. This is one of the deepest ideas running through Star Wars. The struggle is never only between armies or governments. It is also a struggle over stories. The Jedi preserve stories. The Sith manipulate stories. Rebels protect stories. Empires attempt to rewrite them. Camino, Lasan Geonosis, Jeddah, Aldani, Alderaan. Each world carried a memory of what the galaxy had been before Imperial rule. Some remembered freedom. Some remembered faith. Some remembered culture, identity, or belonging. The Empire treated those memories as obstacles because memory gives people something tyranny can never fully control, a point of comparison. That is why Palpatine's greatest weapon was never the Death Star. It was amnesia. He wanted citizens who could no longer imagine alternatives, citizens who would accept Imperial rule as the natural order of the universe. If a world vanished from the archives, if a culture disappeared from public conversation, if a generation grew up never hearing certain names, then the Empire gained another small victory. Yet every victory contained the seed of defeat. Somewhere, a survivor remembered. Somewhere, a hidden archive survived. Somewhere, a child listened to an old story and carried it forward. You can see this principle reflected in the Force itself. Throughout Star Wars, the Force constantly connects past and future. Jedi learn from those who came before them. Visions echo across generations. Ancient mistakes shape modern choices. The Force does not erase history. It binds history together. Palpatine spent his life attempting to dominate that flow. He wanted control over life, death, memory, and destiny itself. But the galaxy repeatedly resists anyone who seeks absolute control. The more tightly the Empire closed its grip, the more truth slipped through its fingers. There is also a quieter lesson hidden beneath these events. The worlds that survived were not always the strongest. They were often the ones that remembered. The Lasat endured because they carried their traditions with them. Alderaanians endured because they refused to let their world become merely a tragedy. Rebels endured because they preserved knowledge others wanted destroyed. Hope in Star Wars is rarely presented as blind optimism. More often it is an act of remembrance. It is the refusal to surrender the past to those who would rewrite it. And so, as the stars drift slowly beyond the viewport and the great struggles of the galaxy fade into silence, you find yourself returning to that lonely beacon, turning through the darkness. The Empire is gone, the fleets are gone, the governors, admirals, and architects of erasure have all passed into history, yet the beacon remains, sending its message into the endless night. Its signal is weak now, almost lost among the stars, but it continues all the same, patiently repeating the name of a forgotten world that refused to disappear.